My name is Irina. I'm 21 years old and a junior majoring in sociology at the University of Colorado. I drove 6 hours back to my hometown of Grand Junction for spring break, expecting to be greeted by the familiar creak of our front porch, or maybe my mom's usual wave from the kitchen window. But when I pulled into the driveway, everything was gone. The house stood silent, curtains stripped, the mailbox stuffed shut. A bold red for sale sign stabbed into the front yard like a declaration that I no longer belonged. I thought I had the wrong house, until I noticed the old oak tree with my childhood initials carved into it. There, on the steps, were 3 black trash bags with my name taped to one of them. I called my mom. No answer. I called my dad. He picked up after 3 rings. "Dad? Where is everything? What's going on?" His voice was flat. "We moved. You're an adult now. Handle it." Then he hung up. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. I stood there in shock, the cold March wind slicing through my jacket, staring at the only trace of my past, 3 trash bags and a silence more brutal than any words. That night, I checked into a rundown roadside motel on the outskirts of town. The heater rattled, the blanket barely covered me. But what stung the most was the silence from my phone. No missed calls, no texts, not even from my younger brother, Darren. I unpacked the 3 trash bags. Inside, a couple of my sweaters, 3 old textbooks, a cracked photo of me from high school graduation, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. That was it. 21 years reduced to 3 bags and a memory frame. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, fingers hovering. Then I created a new folder and titled it, Start Over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, was I that forgettable? That disposable? I used to send part of my paycheck home every month to help with groceries, electricity, whatever they needed. I wasn't perfect, but I never gave them a reason to erase me. And yet, they did. I didn't cry. Not out of strength, but because the pain hadn't fully landed yet. Like I was in a slow-motion fall, watching everything I trusted crumble beneath me. I wasn't just abandoned, I was erased. And in that motel room, I realized I couldn't go back. The next morning, as I sat on the edge of the motel bed sipping burnt coffee from a plastic cup, my laptop pinged. It was a message from Professor Layton, my advisor from university. Just 6 words. "If you need a place, call me." I hesitated, but after everything, I pressed call. She picked up instantly. "Irina, come stay here. No explanations needed. You have a room, a roof, and someone who won't let you feel invisible." By afternoon, I was unpacking in a cozy attic guest room at her home in Eugene. Warm light spilled across the bookshelves. It smelled like cinnamon and trust. For the first time in days, I felt like someone saw me. Over dinner, I told her everything. The silent house, the trash bags, the broken photo frame. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she placed her hand gently over mine and said, "They may have thrown you out, but they did not define your worth." That night, I created a second folder on my laptop and named it Reason, because maybe, just maybe, being forced out wasn't the end. Maybe it was the very beginning of something only I could build, with no one's permission but my own. A few days into staying at Professor Layton's, she handed me a printed flyer from a local nonprofit called Homeground Alliance. It was a grassroots organization working to fight housing insecurity and tenant abuse, especially among students and low-income workers. "They're looking for interns," she said. "I think you should apply." I stared at the flyer, the tagline ringing in my ears. "Everyone deserves a place to feel safe." Something in me stirred. Rage, maybe, or purpose. Either way, it felt alive. I applied that night, pouring every ounce of my truth into the cover letter. A week later, I got the call back. The interview was with a woman named Darlene, mid-40s, direct but kind. She asked why I cared about housing justice. I didn't give her a polished answer. I simply said, Because I know what it feels like to be treated like you're disposable. And I don't want anyone else to feel that powerless. She didn't even blink, just nodded once and said, "You start Monday." That moment shifted something. I wasn't just a girl thrown away with 3 trash bags. I was a woman stepping into something real, something that could rewrite not only my story, but maybe help others rewrite theirs too. My first day at Homeground Alliance was humbling. The office was small, just 3 desks, a coffee machine that barely worked, and a wall lined with case folders stacked higher than my shoulders. But the energy? It was electric. Everyone there had a story. Everyone there had fought to be heard. I was paired with Jalen, a second-year law student who specialized in illegal evictions. He walked me through my first case, a student named Priya who was being kicked out of her apartment mid-semester because the landlord wanted to raise rent for new tenants only. She had no legal support, no one to fight for her. But now, she had us. That week, I read every file I could get my hands on. I stayed late, studied rental laws, and even helped draft a letter that stopped Priya's eviction. She cried on the phone when she heard the news. That moment made something click. I wasn't just patching up my own heart anymore. I was building something that could help others hold on to their dignity. I thought back to that night on the porch, those 3 trash bags, and realized maybe being thrown out wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the beginning of someone else's safety. Every evening after my shift at Homeground, I'd sit in Professor Adler's guest room with a notebook and just think. Not about what I'd lost, but about what could be created from that loss. One night, I scribbled 6 words that kept repeating in my head like a drumbeat. Where do I go from here? That question haunted every story I'd heard. Students kicked out mid-lease, immigrant workers threatened with illegal fees, families with no legal knowledge outmaneuvered by landlords exploiting silence. And I thought, what if there was a central place where no one had to figure it out alone? I called it Haven Loop, a network designed for students, single parents, and low-wage tenants, a hub for legal support, emergency housing info, and one-on-one guidance. Free, fast, judgment-free. A place where "you matter" wasn't just a phrase, it was a system. When I pitched the idea to Professor Adler, she didn't hesitate. "Make it real," she said. And just like that, the gears turned. She connected me to a small university grant. An old friend helped build a prototype site. A lawyer from Homeground offered to review our content. The more I built Haven Loop, the more I felt like I was reclaiming something no eviction could erase: my right to belong. Part 7. The Proof of Purpose. By the time mid-March arrived, Haven Loop had gone from a scribble in my notebook to a functioning pilot project. We had a simple website, a volunteer network of 3 law students, and a growing list of inquiries from people who stumbled upon us through word of mouth. I barely slept, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt alive. One evening, while sorting through emails in our shared workspace, a message popped up from the Wilcox Social Justice Fund, a fellowship program I had applied to weeks prior with Professor Adler's encouragement. The subject line made my breath hitch. "Congratulations, you've been awarded $50,000 for Haven Loop's first expansion phase." I stared at the screen, frozen. $50,000. More than I'd ever imagined holding in my hands. I didn't jump up or scream. I just leaned back and let the quiet pride settle in. We used the grant to move into a small office space near the university. We added a hotline, partnered with 2 legal aid clinics, and developed bilingual resources. Haven Loop was no longer just my story. It was becoming a lifeline. And in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't just survived what they did to me. I'd built something that could survive without them. Just as spring began to bloom in Portland, and our second Haven Loop workshop filled beyond capacity, something happened I hadn't prepared for. A knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find a woman I hadn't seen in over a year, Aunt Margot, my mother's older sister. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders hunched beneath a long gray coat. She held a plain envelope in her hand and said quietly, "I think you should see this." Inside was a letter, postmarked from Santa Fe, New Mexico, addressed to me, but sent to my old family home. It had been forwarded to her by accident. The return address? Ortega and Ruiz Legal Group. I immediately called the number listed. The attorney on the other end, Mr. Ruiz, confirmed what I could hardly process. My late grandmother, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, had passed and had left behind land that had recently been purchased for development. My share? $824,000. I hung up and sat in stunned silence. That amount of money? And I had never known. The worst part? Mr. Ruiz said the first notification had been sent to my parents 9 months ago. They knew, and they had said nothing. I sat in my apartment for hours, the envelope still open on the table, the edges curled slightly from my grip. I replayed the phone call with Mr. Ruiz over and over again in my head. Not just the words, but the pauses, the way he hesitated before mentioning the original notice was sent to my family, the way he confirmed they'd signed the initial documents acknowledging receipt. They had known. For 9 months. While I was building Haven Loop from the ground up, juggling night shifts and grant applications, navigating housing meetings and sleepless nights, they had been sitting on a secret worth over $800,000, and they hadn't told me a word. I thought about every ignored call, every vague message from my mother in the past year. The awkward text from my father that said, "Hope you're doing okay," just after I launched our outreach campaign. At the time, I thought it was guilt or pride. Now I realized it was fear. Fear that I would find out. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stood up, walked to my desk, and opened a new document. Title: Legacy and Lies. Because some truths aren't discovered. They are uncovered. Piece by piece. 2 weeks later, I stood in the glass-walled conference room of the Doveston Civic Center, presenting Haven Loop's expansion plan to the city's Community Equity Board. Behind me was a projected image of our outreach map, outlining partnerships, growth zones, and the vulnerable populations we aim to serve. In front of me sat 9 panelists, funders, policy experts, and nonprofit leaders, each with a copy of our proposal. I was calm, composed, driven. Halfway through my speech, a coordinator stepped in quietly and whispered something to the chair. He turned to me, polite but hesitant. "Ms. Irina Walters, there are 3 people in the lobby asking to speak with you. They say they're your family." I didn't flinch. With a small smile, I said, "Thank you, but I'd prefer to finish. We all came here to discuss a future that includes people often forgotten, people just like I once was." He nodded. I continued my presentation, knowing the greatest power I had now wasn't the money I might secure. It was the voice I had finally learned to use. Whatever was waiting outside that lobby could wait a little longer, because I was no longer the girl they left behind. I was the woman they could no longer silence. I walked out of that conference room, not into fear, but into clarity. They were still there, my mother, my father, and Lyle. Mom looked older, tired eyes full of something between guilt and desperation. Dad kept his arms crossed. Lyle didn't meet my gaze. "Irina, please," Mom said, voice shaking. "We didn't know how to come back after everything. We were scared you'd never speak to us again." I stayed silent. "We saw the story," Lyle added, finally looking up. "About Haven Loop, about what you built. We're proud." I let the silence settle. Then I said, "Pride isn't what I needed. Respect was." They looked stunned. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said the truth they'd spent years avoiding. "I'm not here to repair what you broke. I'm here to protect what I built." They tried to explain, to justify, but this time I didn't carry the conversation. I carried my peace. As I turned to walk away, I didn't feel heavy. I felt whole, because sometimes closure doesn't come from reconciliation. It comes from finally knowing you don't need it anymore. If Irina's story moved you, if you've ever had to walk away from people you once called family, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow our channel for more stories that remind us strength starts in silence, but it grows through action.